Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, pretty good.
Good. Thanks. Thanks for being here.
He did. He put Joe Biden in charge, and it continues to be the last one.
Let's see. We're going to get started in a few minutes here. We've still got people coming in. Thank you all for being here. Paul, have you gotten over, are you watching baseball playoffs yet? Have you gotten over the Mets or not? Do I even bring it up? Are we on to the Giants now?
I don't know what you're talking about. It's football season.
Yeah, exactly.
Some of us in Southern California are still going strong. Sorry.
Unfortunately, I'm in Southern California, and I know that.
Let's see. So, but those of you who are Rams fans, me as a Cowboy fan, I gotta feel pretty good right now. I don't know, Larry, where you fall in the football world.
Well, I grew up a Rams fan way back in the day. They moved away. I don't care about them, but rivalry, there are certain teams I still have to dislike. So
Sure.
I won't talk about that too much because I'm trying to play Switzerland here and not upset too many people.
I'm going to mute everybody, guys. If y'all can unmute those of your speakers, we're getting some feedback here. So I'm going to mute everyone.
I'm muted up here. You muted us.
All right. So Larry, you back?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay. And Murray?
Yeah, hi.
And John?
John's still muted.
John, you there?
How's that?
That's good. Much better. All right. It's 4:03. We will go ahead and get started here. First off, I want to tell you all thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it very much. I must confess I am out of practice a bit at Zooms. Thankfully, 2 years ago, I knew how to do this backwards and forwards. Now I've forgotten a lot, and I'm glad that I have, because we are able to get together in person again. Secondly, we are going to be really responsive to people's questions. There's already a little bit of a thread going over on the chat section for people talking about what wine they happen to be drinking right now. Or in the case of Josh, drinking coffee. Sorry about that, Josh. We are, but if you have questions, please post them there and we'll get to them. And I think we'll begin with some introductions. Why don't we go furthest to nearest? Larry, you are furthest away. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your wines, that kind of thing.
Certainly. Well, thank you all for joining us. We appreciate it. I'm Larry Shafer, owner, winemaker of Tercero Wines. I make wine down here in Santa Barbara County, kind of the no man's land in California wine, I like to say. Yes, I've got a chip on my shoulder right there. I've been making wine for nearly 2 decades. Didn't start out in the wine business, went back to school, got my master's degree in viticulture and enology from Davis, moved up here, started working at Fess Parker Winery, eventually branched off to do my own thing. And now come full circle. I'm actually teaching a course at UC Davis as part of their winemaking certificate program online. So unlike Adam, I have been using Zoom quite a lot, hopefully still well-versed in it. I mainly work with Rhone varieties, but I have started working with Pinot. I also do a Dry Gewürztraminer. I do a Cab Franc. I do a bunch of other things as well. So thank you all for joining us. Appreciate it.
And then John, you are next furthest away, albeit not too far at all.
from
For me.
yeah, I guess Murray and I are kind of tied a
Well,
little bit.
she's upstairs and I'm downstairs, so I think she is definitely
Okay,
closer than
okay.
you are right now.
I was talking about like vineyard sourcing, Russian
Yes,
River, that sort of
yes.
thing, but, yeah, so John Bucher, I am a grape grower, and then Diane, my wife, and I have our own brand, Bucher Wines, and Adam is our winemaker, and Murray our assistant winemaker, and we've been growing grapes for 25 years, mainly Pinot, a little bit of Chardonnay, a little bit of Sauv Blanc, and new this year where we actually made, we were talking earlier, we pretty excited about bringing in some Grenache, which Adams and Murray will shepherd through at the winery here. So, and we've been growing grapes for 25 years. Diane and I started our own wine brand. We sell to about 20 to 22 to 25 wineries, and then in 2011 we started our own brand, and we do about 1,500 cases, very small, but that's yeah, that's us, all Russian River.
Cool. And Murray?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Murray Breland, and I've been in the wine industry for over 10 years, but the last 2 have been in production doing my own wines, which is what I'm drinking, my Russian River Pinot Noir. And I make a Pinot Noir. I started that last year in 2021 and did it again this year. And then also this year I added in a Zinfandel, and along with other things, working with Adam on Clarice and Beaumarchais, Bucher, and other clients that we consult for.
And I'm Adam Lee. I was the founder of Sideri Wines. I'm the owner of Clarice Wines, along with Beaumarchais, with Philippe Campy. Consult with a number of different people, and am going to kind of hopefully corral everybody here and lead the Zoom in a positive forward direction, so we can talk about the season, and we're going to talk about it truly the entire growing season. I mean, it's easy to talk just about harvest, but in fact, harvest really begins long before harvest starts. I mean, it begins with bud break, and one can even say it begins with the previous year in some ways, and the primordial fruit development, bud development, and how much fruit you have out there. John, you're the one that spends the most time out in the vineyard. I know. What did you see early on with pruning and that type of thing? We talked about that briefly.
Yeah, actually, and you bring up a really good point. Not only about the primordial, the bud set from what happened last year really drives what a lot of what we see in the vineyard the following year with the buds, and actually I think this year was probably more so to that point, mainly not just about the bud set, but also from the previous year, but the cumulative effect of the drought, based on the last, we're in our 3rd year of a pretty severe drought, and cumulative effect of that, where last year we only had we only had a third of our average rainfall here in Healdsburg. And we really saw issues out in the vineyard, and it really affected vine growth, and especially our cane pruned vines. And we just saw lighter canopies all of last year. And that really impacted, we saw already in January when we finished pruning that we knew we were going to have a lighter crop just based on the number of bud positions we had set, because we had to prune back so much because of the weaker canes that were left from the shoots from the previous year. So we knew that was already in play. And then as we can, at least for us, just to put it in a nutshell, we pretty much saw pretty much every kind of weather condition, mainly adverse for grape growing, between March and May, and then actually all the way up to harvest with a heat spike right before harvest. So We saw a cold spring. We saw actually the only thing that was relatively normal was our bud break. We had bud break around March 1st. Usually you figure, March 1st to March 15th for us. And a lot of times we've had it earlier. And this year was actually fairly normal. And I think the colder weather drove that.
John, going back to the drought thing, one of the things I'm seeing a number of growers doing that they weren't doing a few years ago, and Larry, I don't know if you want to chime in on this as well down in Santa Barbara, where they get even less rain sometimes, but I'm seeing growers watering over the winter time now and trying to replicate in some ways the rain that we're not getting by putting earlier irrigations on. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and we actually we've been incorporating that into our vineyard management plan for the last few years, especially when the years are dry, and it definitely helps. We also did some nutrient injections also while we dripped in last fall and in the spring to help. Did more nutrient additions than previous years, and it definitely the irrigating in the winter. We actually started irrigating the vines once a week, the steeper elevation blocks in January. And we had 3 months of virtually no rain in January, February, March, and that's usually when we are getting the soils a decent amount of rain and fairly saturated, and that hasn't happened in a few years. And there are some effects of that we can talk about later. But basically, the irrigation definitely helps. Unfortunately, it doesn't replace, getting the whole all the ground under the vines, including the avenues, with that 30 to 45 inches of rain, which we normally get. So it definitely did help. And we will probably continue doing that if we end up with another dry year.
Larry, what are people talking about in Santa Barbara as far as irrigation, concerns about the drought, weather, that kind of thing?
We've been through this not too long ago. 13 to 15 were incredibly hot years in our area. And it taught us a lot. It taught us that the vines are certainly more resilient than we might have thought they were. It taught us that the vines can acclimate to their conditions as well. What changed a lot was seemingly some soil chemistry. We ended up seeing grapes that, getting closer to harvest, grapes that had relatively normal pHs, but had very low titratable acidity. And therefore, if you were just looking at one marker of acidity, you might have been missing the entire point of acidity. But the growers down here are concerned, but not overly concerned. I know I've seen some overhead sprinkler irrigation going off in January with some of the larger vineyards. I haven't seen much going off with many of the smaller vineyards.
Murray, I know for you, actually, the lack of rain that we had in January, February, we really didn't get rain at all in those months. I think for San Francisco, they said it was the first January, February without rain in their recorded history, at least. But then we did get some in March, but it did change the section of Zen that you were getting for your wine.
Yeah, so it was in February when I was making the decision on which vineyard block I wanted to source my Zinfandel from. And there was a 75-year-old block and there's a 110-year-old block. And I really wanted the 110-year-old because it was just so much more interesting. However, it was dry farmed and the 75-year-old block had irrigation on it. And seeing that we hadn't had any rain that entire year so far, we opted for the 75-year-old block. And then the season started to get a little bit better and we were kind of kicking ourselves thinking, oh no, we could have gone with the 100-plus-year-old block, but then we had that heat spike. And so then I was really thankful for having irrigation available. So it all worked out, but yeah, it definitely made an impact, just how the weather was going at the time. And it was a big decision to base it off of weather and irrigation, but water is important at any stage, at any age.
So one of the things that I know, and John, I mean, maybe weigh in on this a little bit, but you kind of did earlier. You were talking about irrigation, which is good, but it's not a substitute for truly a drenching rain. And actually, Larry's talking about like overhead comes closer to a rain versus just drip irrigation. But one of the things that I have read about and talked to some other growers about is that salts will gather around the roots. And when you don't have rain to wash them out, and that will prevent uptake of some nutrients into the vines, and that can be a real longer term concern as far as drought goes. Does that make some sense, John?
Yeah, actually we saw, and that was part of what led. We had certain spots in the vineyard, and you have to understand our vineyard elevation, and we have some pretty steep blocks and some pretty high elevation blocks, and it dries out fairly soon in the year. So those were the blocks we were adding, started with irrigating sooner. But even with that, because of last year, not this 2021, we only had 15, between the end of 2020 and beginning of 2021, we only had 15 inches of rain, which was really, and it just, a lot of it just, it was so spread out. We just didn't see that soil saturation. And to your point, Adam, we ended up seeing some very strange things happening in the vineyard. And it was, we ended up diagnosing some not big blocks, but parts of certain blocks with boron toxicity. And basically we just didn't have the rainfall to leach that or flush that out of the soil. And that really inhibited growth. It slowed ripening down. We had to go through in 2021 and drop a lot of fruit again, because we just couldn't get it ripe. The canopies were just falling apart. And that was a real, and I'm glad it only happened in a few parts of the vineyard, because we were able to mitigate it this year and work with our pest control advisor and added some special nutrients, like I mentioned, and the timing of it, and it really helped. It also helped this year that in the fall of like a year ago, we had some pretty heavy rains, which was really a godsend. And then like in October, November, December, and then it stopped in January, which again led to the 3 months of no rain. So that led to the boron toxicity. We were able to mitigate it, but it did affect the vine growth and the canopy growth for 2022. And then back to what I mentioned about having to prune our certain sites back more than normal, just to for the health of the vines. And again, we knew already in January of this year it was going to be a light crop. And then we'll talk about the other issues.
Sure. So why don't we start then with Larry also talking about like the season after the vines they pushed, things were going out. Was it a warm year down there, cool year? What did you see?
It was a relatively average year. We had a decent amount of wind, and so we ended up with a lot of uneven fruit set. There's a lot of chicks and hens situation in a lot of varieties. Not just in Pinot. Pinot it's known for, but I saw it in pretty much every variety I picked. But it was, the vintage was aiming to be a kind of an above average vintage down here in terms of crop size. There were certainly some challenges because of the dryness, but again, the vines down here have acclimated that over the last decade, so it didn't affect us, I guess maybe as much as some other places. But things were looking good through the summer and into early fall, if that answers that question.
Sure. No, I mean, I would say in the San Lucia Highlands, much the same thing. It was not nearly as cool as 2018. It didn't, but it wasn't a hot year either. I mean, it's kind of boring. It really, I mean, in some way, not that that's bad, but it's I working with Gary Francione and Mark Pizzoni, I will do certain thinning differently based on if I think the year's ahead of normal or behind. I always thought this year was running a little bit ahead of normal as far as the pace goes, but not tremendously so, not out of the the range kind of thing. And so it was like, it's kind of, use a golf analogy, it was kind of a shot right down the middle in some ways. You know, maybe not as long as you wanted it to be, or not. It was fine. It was good.
Yeah, those are the harvests that kind of scare you because you know something's coming. You just don't know when. If you think it's going to be a perfect harvest, there ain't no such thing. So it's just a matter, it's kind of like in the winery. You know something wrong is going to happen with one of your fermentations. You just don't know which one or when. So but no, I agree with you. It was a relatively normal harvest. It did look maybe a little early, but early is a relative term based on, again, looking at the last decade. We've had grapes in our area picked as early as the beginning to middle of August, which is very early. Traditionally, we wouldn't see stuff starting to pick until September. As the way that they're making wines has changed in terms of ripeness levels, etc., but growing as well. We started seeing that earlier and earlier and earlier. It still freaks me out when I see grapes coming in August. It just doesn't seem right.
No, I agree with you. It does not, but I've gotten sadly a little more used to it now than I had before. John, I wouldn't say the same thing existed up here in Sonoma County and in the Russian River. I know there was frost, there was hail. I mean, it wasn't all the plagues. I don't think locusts, or we weren't putting lamb's blood above the door to have the angel of death passes over yet, but it was challenging.
Yeah, it was a cold spring. Just I think the lack of rain set us up for the potential for a colder spring. Usually when we have our normal tropical rainstorms are actually warm, and it actually keeps the ground somewhat warmer. And it just seemed like everything was cold. And then we had a pretty severe frost in the third week of April, and it affected areas that we normally don't have to frost protect. And I've never heard so many growers talk about the unusual damage from areas that are normally fine. And then the first, I think it was right around the 7th or through the 10th of May, we had these hailstorms come through, and there were just cells that came through, and it was the weirdest thing because it didn't. I have 2 properties that I lease just north of us, and both of those were hit pretty hard with the hail, and my place just south, probably a half mile south, had some you could see some some holes in leaves, but not nearly the fruit damage, the cluster damage we saw on the other ranches. And that's how. And then I sell grapes to William Sellium, and talking to Jeff, that a day later, they're about 2 miles south of us. They got hammered with another hail cell that came through that area. It was the weirdest year, and we just don't see that during. I mean, we don't see it to the extent that we see damage. In fact, I remember, Adam, when we were looking at the Sauv Blanc. I think we already had it scheduled the day after we had that hail come through, and we looked at it. I think, yeah, you and Murray looked at it and we're like, I mean, you heard about it happening in France, but you've never actually seen it. And that's right. I think the first time that you've made grapes or made wine, from Oregon to Santa Barbara, and you've pretty much seen it all. So it was a very strange time to see that. And have that.
I really haven't seen in 29 years of making wine. It's not like I've never seen hail, but it's very rare here in Sonoma County to see hail. And hail is such very specific to a particular site in a particular area. So, I mean, you could see the path that it kind of followed through some of your grapes and some of the stuff you leased. You could see it, the path that it went through, but you could be on other sides of it or other parts of your vineyard and there was no sign of it. So, I mean, it's a very isolated kind
Yes.
of thing.
Yeah. So, and there were cells that you heard that there were some over in Napa that hit. There are different parts of the county and over in the Napa County too, that had some damage from hail, or at least had hail, these cells that came through and dropped hail. So it was very strange. It was very strange.
Yeah, I saw a picture in St. Helena with the hail, and it looked like it had snowed. There was so much hail on the ground, but I mean, then that was just St. Helena, and just like you said, 2 miles up, probably fine, and clear skies. So we really did get almost all of the plagues.
So Murray, one of the things I know that you saw was different cluster sizes than you did the year before in berry size in the Lakeview Vineyard where you get your Pinot from.
Sure. Yeah, I was really spoiled with the 2021 vintage, it being my first one. I've been joking, it's kind of like, your firstborn that listens to you and sleeps through the night by month 2. And then now my second vintage in production, it's that middle child that's a little crazy, and it's been a good learning year. And but it resulted in a lot more work in the vineyard, dropping a lot more fruit than I had to do last year. There wasn't as much of a canopy and shoot growth, but they still had some clusters on it. And I remember saying to multiple vines, like, what are you doing with fruit on you? You're not going to be able to ripen that up, and having to drop it because the shoots were only this big with 2 clusters. I'm like, you can't do that, little guy. and so dropping that fruit because it just wasn't going to ripen the way that I was going to want my Pinot to taste. And so it was a lot more hands-on work that I'm sure John had to do out in the vineyard as well. Things that we worked with Mark and Gary and SLH, and just much more hands-on vintage this year, it seemed.
So one of the things then, as we get closer to harvest, I mean, things were progressing along, I think, pretty nicely. But then Labor Day always is that time where something weird happens. I mean, it's not quite Farmer's Almanac. It's even more superstitious than that. But I'm one of these that I'm like, oh shit, Labor Day's coming. Something's going to happen, because it seems like more often than not, it does. And we got hot. We got very warm here.
Actually, Adam, to jump in and remind you, so there's a story. Adam talks to Gary Francione every morning, and Adam was like, "Oh, it's going to be hot. It's late, or it's this weekend. It's going to be really warm." And Gary Francione was like, "What are you talking about? No, it's not. It's fine." And Adam was like, "Well, it's Labor Day." He was like, "Oh, well, then yeah, something's going to be up." and it was just, whether it's the moon or a full moon or however it is that, they kind of go off of their harvest, flavors and stuff. Gary Pizzoni says that a new moon or a full moon gives you more flavors and the other one brings you more acid. But yeah, it was, and it was a horrible heat wave that we got, more so up here in the Russian River.
Yeah. So Larry, what was Labor Day in the heat like for you guys down in Santa Barbara? Did it change anything picking decision wise for you or friends of yours or anything?
Oh yeah, no, without a doubt. But I mean, it is funny because Labor Day perennially, this 3-day weekend perennially is hot, and it always, depending upon the vintage, if it's a really short vintage, if there's not a lot of crop level, this is the deciding weekend factor for Pinot in a lot of vineyards in Santa Barbara County. I remember stories a number of years ago of people that pre-Labor Day, the grapes were sitting about 20. By Tuesday, they were at 26, and people were kind of freaking out. So The difference between this year and previous years, was the length of the heat spike that we had. Normally we see heat spikes of 1-2 days. We had heat that extended well over a week, but not only did we have heat, we had extreme humidity. So it never cooled down whatsoever. So what that did is we started seeing acid fall out much faster than we normally see acid fall out. You need cold temperatures at night to prevent evaporation. That wasn't happening, so you were starting to see acids fall very quickly. With the Rhone varieties, there was no concern whatsoever, because those are only going to ripen later anyway. But with Sauvignon Blanc, with Pinot, we started seeing people freak out. Now the growers, because they've experienced this so often, and because it was predictive, they started watering 3 to 5 days before the heat hit. So we didn't have many situations where vines shut down, because that's one of the main concerns. When you have extended heat, those vines just kind of give up, and they just stop producing the way that they're supposed to produce. And you end up with sugar levels that actually just kind of stay exactly where they are and never really go anywhere. What we saw was, because of the watering, things stayed relatively consistent, and then they actually fell. So we saw a lot of numbers go backwards right after the heat spike, and then kind of came back after things equilibrated. But it was a much tougher situation. But I think, and Adam, you had, I clearly remember the Facebook post you had about, okay, what do I do? This is that deciding factor. Do I let it hang, and do I not? And I think this is one of the situations where winemakers that have gone through this kind of know what to expect. And we saw situations where things were picked before the heat spike, and then literally 2 weeks later, they were still at those same sugar numbers, but had better development. What happens is that heat is going to increase sugar content, but the grapes aren't necessarily physiologically ready to pick. And we've seen that happen a lot. One person brought up Grenache. Grenache is a prime example. Zinfandel is another prime example. Sugar levels can shoot up way faster than the grapes are ready to pick. So as a winemaker, you need to make that decision. Do I have the patience to wait, or do I need to get it off now? And it's been really interesting seeing how different winemakers have reacted to it this year.
So working with, first off, San Lucia Highlands, we were very fortunate it did not get as warm. In fact, Rosella's vineyard has a weather station. Gary's does not, but Sierra Mar at the southern end does. And so Gary's is kind of in between. Rosella's never hit 100 degrees, which is amazing given how hot it was. I think the highest was like 94 actually. Sierra Mar at the southern end of the SLH hit 102. But again, 102 you can deal with kind of thing. That meant that Gary's probably hit 96, 98 kind of number. So very fortunate there that it didn't get as hot as some other areas did. However, it is what you said, Larry, it was extended. It lasted for, there was this prediction it's going to last 3 days, and it went for 6 or something like that. At warmer temperatures, warmer evening temperatures. There was one night down there that it didn't get below 70, and that's unheard of in the San Lucia Highlands. But the stuff doesn't stop ripening at that point in time. I mean, it's still ripening even at night kind of situation. So I did have them put a lot of water on my sections. In fact, kind of an unprecedented amount. They did one 18-gallon water, which, I mean, 18 gallons 3 days before the heat spike, a ton of water. And then we had them do one like 6 days after that as well. But it was a situation where I really thought it was the best thing. If I was going to wait through it, you needed to make that decision like 3 days beforehand to say, I'm going to wait, so let it have the water or not. Murray, I know Pinot for you was off before Labor Day, but Zin was still hanging, and that was a concern for you.
Yeah, I was bummed. I like that we're going through the entire growing season here and sharing with everyone, kind of from the beginning of the vine, and now we can also share how it's tasting and how it tasted in tank and in barrel, and with that we're really happy. but before the heat, it was just everything looked so great in that vineyard. I was so pleased with
Are you
like,
ready, baby?
every vine. But then after the heat, I mean, like you said, it was supposed to be 3, and then it dipped to like 98 for a day, and then it went back up to 105 and then 109. And then that is, I think, where it hurt my Zinfandel. And so I was already planning on picking after the heat, but before they picked, I went through the vineyard again and spent another 4 hours walking row by row, vine by vine, and just dropping the fruit that had been sunburnt, dehydrated. And then there was this other kind of, it was this like really dark berry that kind of formed, and it just tasted awful. And so I went through and dropped that. I probably lost about 20% of my fruit from that heat. But what ended up in tank, I was really, really pleased with.
So let's get down to yields right now. And John, we'll start with you. And it's not a pleasant subject in some ways, for you at least.
Yeah, it was, I wasn't sure. Well, back up a little bit. I'm drinking our 2020 Booker Pinot Pomard clone, just released. But I also hesitated. I also thought this has been such a crap harvest that I brought out the Forester bourbon, because that's the kind of, this is what I really should be drinking, because it was that kind of harvest. It was really unfortunate. It was the lowest yielding harvest I've ever experienced in 25 years. Anywhere from
2020.
I'm
right?
sorry.
Including 2020.
Yeah, including, and in fact, but well, we'll get through the bad part first.
Yeah.
The bad part is anywhere from yields of 25% of normal to about 50 to 60% of normal. And to put that in perspective, in 2020, a lot of folks remember the 2020 vintage with the fires that we had, but we knew that was a light vintage. We were 30% off pretty much across the board, at least in the Russian River Valley. And that was really the bigger issue as a grower, and as well as the smoke, or the potential for smoke taint with the fires. But we actually got through that pretty well, because it was a light harvest in 2020. We actually, we were harvesting early. I know, Larry, you're hard to believe that we harvested in August, but I've actually started harvest more in August in 25 years than I have in September. That's just the way, and we've created some of that ourselves by densifying our blocks and having less pounds per vine, but also the climate is definitely affecting that also. So relatively speaking, this was almost in some blocks twice as big of a loss, if that makes sense, than in 2020. The good news is, I think, as just tasting the 2020s now, I mean, the wines are going to be phenomenal. I'm pretty impressed with the 2020s. Tannin structures are just off the charts. I think these wines are going to age beautifully. I would think the same would hold true with the we had some really nice, the 2021 vintage was really nice. I think the 2022 we'll see. It's interesting talking about, what we brought up earlier, Adam, about nutrient levels and certain deficiencies. I think, Larry, you mentioned that also. So the jury's still out with 2022, but there's some the fruit quality and was really nice the last 3 years. So I got to end it with a little positivity there, because it's been a rough one.
And Murray, for you, number of barrels like on Pinot this year compared to the year before, since you do have a comparison there.
Yeah, no, I was down. I actually sourced more Pinot to try to because my sections were down and I was still down, even getting more than what I got last year. So, which then also caused some issues in the winery. But yeah, it's very low. And then same with my Zin. My Zin was, I was expecting about 5.5 tons and I got about 3.3. It's rough.
Larry, what are yields like for you down in Santa Barbara with different grape types as well? All the different things you're dealing with, and you're dealing with. I mean, I don't know how many different grapes you're making, but it's quite a few. So I'd anticipate some of them didn't have that low yield effect compared to others.
It was really site specific. I mean, and I'm still waiting. One of the barometers will be when I bring in my Grenache Syrah and Mourvedre from Larner. That'll kind of give me a different perspective. But I know, like I was reading about people pulling Syrah from Bien Nacido and getting like 1/10 of what they thought they were going to get. I'm not seeing yields anywhere down like that. The Pinots that I brought in, they were either on par or maybe down about 20%. Pretty much everything else has been pretty much on target. Not that much lower than I expected it to be. But again, it really depends. I think it just really depends upon site.
So, and that would be true even white versus red versus, I mean, it didn't seem to matter across the board.
I actually was about 1/3 off. I brought in Chenin Blanc from the Jurassic Vineyard for the first time this year, and that was about 30% lower than what I was expecting. My Grenache Blanc that I brought in was probably about 25% lower. I'm still waiting. I'm getting Marsan Friday, and I'll figure out that. But the other whites that I brought in have been on target with what I expected. So again, site specific.
Sure. For me, I actually just looked it up, and I based it on barrels. Last year, I had 31 barrels of Clarice. This year, I've got 22 barrels of Clarice. So down by 9 off a base of 31. So you're talking about a 30% decrease as far as the yield goes for Clarice. So yeah, I mean it's significant there. What did you see, or what have you seen, Larry? I mean, since you're still in the midst of some things, what are you seeing as far as fermentations go? And I mean, numbers, flavors, colors. I mean, we don't make wine off of numbers. I know you well enough to know that, but we do pay attention to numbers. So what are you seeing out there?
Fermentations have seemed to go faster this year than previous years. I don't do dry ice. I just do kind of ambient cold soak. I also do all my reds 100% whole cluster foot stomped, so which is going to create some potential situations there at the beginning of fermentation. But my ferments have kicked off much faster this year. I let them go natural, and then I that I like to use. But I found that in almost every red ferment, except the Cab Franc, every other one has kicked off much faster than I anticipated it kicking off compared to the past. Everything else appears to be fine. I mean, I'm working with varieties. Color doesn't really affect me at all. I work with varieties like Counois and Cinsault that don't have a lot of color. So I'm never really concerned about color in wine. I don't think it's indicative of anything. It is to a consumer, but in terms of quality, tannin, everything else, it doesn't necessarily, there's no direct correlation per se, but everything else has been good. I mean, there's definitely been some lack of acid in a couple of the varieties. And I'm seeing that kind of across the board. I know people recently that have brought in Syrah from vineyards in the area that they were dealing with pHs, in the low 4s and TAs in the high 3s, very low acid compared to what they would normally expect. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that also is that humidity. We're also starting to see some of the grapes that are hanging a little bit longer. We're starting to see more mold issues, which we generally do not see down here. But I think because of the humidity and then because of the light amount of rain that we got, even though it's been warm, it has not been windy at all. And I think it set the stage for some mold to be growing more so than in the past.
I have seen a couple of people down there, friends of mine, who've had some things that seem like they are, I would say stuck, or sugars aren't moving anymore on some things. Is that something either you're seeing or you're hearing?
Oh, without a doubt. And I certainly am concerned. Like, I haven't brought in my Mourvedre for my rosé yet.
Okay.
And it sounds crazy to think that rosé has not come in. And it's not, we're not talking about, I'm not trying to make a high alcohol rosé. It's sitting at about 19 and a half bricks. It is moving. It is moving ever so slowly. I have not seen the situation. As I said, I saw things go backwards, and those things are starting to move forward. But I have heard of people with Syrah specifically that things have kind of been stuck at the same sugar level for a couple of weeks. And that's kind of like when you're doing a fermentation, it gets to about 3 and you're like, please move beyond 3 because we don't want it being there. Kind of that same situation. It would scare me if that was happening. As long as there's flavor development going on, I guess it's okay. But if it's just sitting there at that temperature, at that bricks, without any kind of movement, any physiological markers as well, if you're not seeing seeds start to brown, if you're not seeing pimpling on Syrah, for instance, then it would really concern me. The Syrah that I'm bringing in from Larner is late, but they also went through veraison really late. So I knew it was going to take time, and it's slow to develop, but I've picked this. It's not uncommon for me to pick Syrah around Halloween. So, I mean, just Santa Barbara County tends to have a much later, longer and later growing season than other places. So it doesn't freak me out per se, as long as we're continuing to see movement.
Sure. One of the things that I know that I saw at a number of places was, and it's interesting, we look at something called YANs. It's basically shorthand yeast available nutrients, but I mean, overall nutrient levels in wines. And they looked good this year. I saw good levels of nutrient. And yet I saw a number of places where fermentations were slightly stinky. It's very easy to deal with, to add some nutrient to take care of it. But it makes me think that while the overall nutrient level is good, some small micronutrient is missing and leading to a little bit of reduction or stink in the ferment. It's kind of like saying, what's your overall nutrient intake? And maybe you're getting tons of iron, but you're not getting enough calcium. Well, your overall number would look really good from a health point of view, but that doesn't mean you don't need the calcium for something else. And I saw some weird things like that with some ferments for some different clients and different people.
That's interesting. And I'm curious whether they've done further analysis, but I also think that as our industry is moving towards less rather than more, I think people are adding less nutrients to their ferments. And I think that in a good year, it's certainly possible to do that, but people are pushing that more and more, less SO2, less nutrients. It sounds great in theory, but ultimately these have a job to do, and you need to make sure that job happens. So that would be the concern, is that the dogma of trying to do less is going to get in the way of the actions, so to speak.
Well, to me, it was just a situation of you need to stay on top of it. You need to go by every day. You need to smell. Not that you don't need to do that stuff anyhow, but you don't miss a day, because if you miss a day, you might miss. Then the problem may become more ingrained in the whole thing. In that, Murray, your ferments seem to go pretty well, but I know, if I recall, we had a few things at the end that just took a little while to kind of finish out.
Yes, it did. I mean, I only had, I still have some stuff actually fermenting. I have some of my rosé that's pretty close to dry, but it took some time. One of them was just the location of one of my ferments, and then when I was able to move it around, that pushed it through. Obviously, like what you were saying with getting a little bit of stink on some stuff, and it was interesting with some client we saw, it was like, when it got around the 15-10 bricks range, it just developed a little bit of a smell, but then you add some fermate and then it cleans it up right up and went along smoothly. So I mean, different from last year too. Again, a good learning year for me. Last year, everything just went through perfectly fine. And then this year was, again, just more of that hands-on, like you said, just watching it, tasting it every day, and yeah, helping it.
It's one of those situations where harvest really hasn't ended, even if we have everything in barrel. I mean, Larry still has stuff on the vine, so truly has not ended for him. But normally you press off and you're like, okay, then it'll wait for it to go through ML. But there's a number of things that are just at the point of we're continuing to monitor them and to make sure that things are truly finishing in barrel, or that there's a real conclusion, a safe conclusion to things. It's not a slam dunk. Having said that, one of the things I've been impressed with this year is initially right off some of the weight, some of the concentration, some of the flavors. Larry talked a lot about you can get sugar before you get flavor development, and that's always a concern in these years where you have the big heat spikes. But I really think the way things are tasting are really great. It's not a year that I'd look at and say, my gosh, I was worried that maybe it wouldn't turn out that way. And yet I think kind of despite against all odds, it's turning around to be right off at least a pretty tasty kind of year at this point in time. I mean, Larry, are you seeing some of those same things?
Well, I think we're programmed to say that, aren't we, Adam? Come on now. Every year
We're supposed to say that, but
I'm happy with what I'm tasting. I mean, a lot of the whites that I make are very lean, and I'm tasting great flavors, even though they're quite lean.
Do you put them through ML?
It depends upon the variety. My Shannon, I'm going to, because I'm going to keep that in oak a little bit longer. But and my Marsan, I will, it's going to be an oak probably 16 months, so it's going to go through whether I wanted to or not. I don't hit it with lysozyme or anything. I hit it with SO2 to kind of slow it down, but it does what it's going to do. But I do a dry Gewürztraminer. That's not going to go through ML. I do a Claret Blanche. I'm doing a Picpoul Blanc for the first time. Those are not going to go through ML. Those will be quick in barrel, or quick in stainless, quick to market kind of things. My Pinots, I very much like the flavors, but as you know, Adam, I'm not a Pinot guy. So assessing Pinot Young is not an easy thing for me to do, especially when you're doing everything 100% whole cluster. So I'm happy about the way they're going. It's curious you're mentioning, after barreling down, what's happening, because what most consumers don't understand is when we're not pressing bone dry. You tend to press with a little bit of residual sugar in there. Not a huge amount.
Particularly when you do whole cluster, like you're doing 100%. I was like 80-ish% this year on the Clarice wines. That press cuts tend to break open some of those clusters, and you notice a little bit of bump in sugars on that.
Yeah, you certainly can. So I mean, it's but everything, like all my Pinots pressed in tank before barreling down are about -1. Mm-hmm. So they're kind of exactly where I want them to go, but they're not dry at that point. They probably still have 0.3 to 0.5% residual sugar. So you still want them to go through complete fermentation. And now you scared the heck out of me, Adam. Now I need to go back and check. The other thing that's going to be interesting is with the heat spike, what happened to Maliks. I don't run full analysis. I don't do a Yan analysis. I don't do Malik. So I don't know what my starting Malik figure is. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting to see this year whether we're dealing with lower Malik acid numbers than usual, and therefore faster through ML, but also less of an acid shift in ML.
And I've seen some lower Maliks, without a doubt, on some of the things that I have tested on. I've seen some juice panels. I've seen some lower Maliks. And I can find those years to be a little hard-edged sometimes because they don't have that roundness of going through ML. But I was talking with a person, actually someone here was drinking one of the wines, Paul, you are the Holdridge, you just happened to mention it there. I was talking with John Holdridge about his fermentation earlier this week, and one of the things we were talking about was, I think this is one of those years that the story is really not going to be fully written until we're through ML, that we're going to have a better idea of the quality of the wine. And it may be incredibly high quality, but it may also be one that's more supple in some ways or not, or it may not. I mean, whether or not it makes old bones, we'll have to see. But I think ML, once we're past that, then we're going to have a much better idea of the overall quality than where we are right now.
Adam, you'll still be able to sell your bottles for $64 million a case. It doesn't matter.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So
There you go.
that includes taxes and shipping. However, no, so it's a deal.
Anywhere in the world and anywhere in intergalactic as well. You're willing to ship to Mars. I know you are.
That's it. So
You would if you could.
yeah. Yeah, no, there's the third grader in me. I'll send it to Uranus as well. But that third grade boy never gets past the Uranus joke. So there were a couple of questions that I wanted to address, and that we kind of did in the chat, but just different things, not necessarily tied into harvest, but we've got 5 or so minutes left. John, there was one question about Grenache and why Grenache now for Bucher. Is that a reflection on the climate change? Is that the grapes became available? What reason for Grenache?
Actually, it's a combination of a couple things. The grapes came available. It's on one of the leased properties that I have, and then it kind of was an idea brewing in the back of my mind. And then Adam and I had some conversations, and I think I was intrigued by. I've been completely intrigued by Adam's the wine, the partnership he had with Philippe Cambie, and working with him and the Beaumarchais wines. I just think they're fascinating wines, first of all, and so. The last few years we've talked on and off about some of the techniques that Adam and Philippe used with Beaumarchais, and a little background for those that don't know. Philippe is a Rhone from the Rhone area of France, and was a Rhone grape a winemaker.
And an expert, really. I mean, that's what he specialized in, was
yeah.
Grenache in particular.
And so I thought it would just be super cool if we had these grapes available, and talking with Adam, and Adam is just an incredible sponge of information. Plus he learns very quickly, and he could take this information and these techniques that he learned from Philippe, and we can apply it to a few tons of Grenache. And I just think it's interesting. It's fascinating to me. And I just thought it would be something really, really cool to try. And it was something different than, well, back up a little bit. Another thing happened. We do a little bit of Zinfandel, and our Zinfandel block got so hammered that we share it with another winery. We decided to give that up because it was going to be we were going to have to, it was going to be hardly anything that we were going to get. And we gave that up, gave that to the other winery, and took on, and I was on the fence whether we're going to do the Grenache, but because it was so light in the Zin, it's like, okay, let's take on this Grenache. And kind of what Moray was saying too, we were looking for everything was light. And so we're looking for other options. So it was a combination of, this would be really cool to work with Adam on this project and with the Grenache. And we were with things so light, we were going to be short without having the Zin. So let's do this. And I think it worked out really well. It was really, it was really interesting. This is the part that's really interesting. And I know this gets a little geeky, but it's being a 90% Pinot guy, just being on the sorting table with the Grenache and seeing how different those clusters are. There was hardly any juice, and we're used to a lot of juice with Pinot. And then it was very interesting how you alluded earlier, Larry, about when you do whole cluster, you still have some fermentation going on once you barrel down. And that was really interesting to see a little more RS when we pressed off the Grenache, which meant we were going to and because of those berries, we didn't whole cluster them, but they just didn't break down the same. Correct, Adam? Is that what
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we didn't do any whole cluster, but the berries themselves, thick enough skins, there was a lot of
Yeah.
whole berry. I mean, truly like marbles kind of thing on the Grenache.
Yeah, so it was really interesting to see that. As a Pinot guy, it was really fun. The Grenache was the last thing, so I had the opportunity to be more involved in that. But it was just really interesting to see the difference. Here they're all grapes. They all, I mean, they're kind of in the same family, but it's so different from the growing season was different. How we farm it in the vineyard was different. There are a couple of things that we did differently, and then how it was brought in and how it was barreled down was so different too. So I just find that incredibly fascinating and so interesting. So looking forward to doing that. So it's something we, I probably over-explained this, but there's probably 5 or 6 different reasons why this was just why it worked and to do it. And so
2 other questions real quick. We'll go to them. One of them was about supply chain. Larry, you kind of answered it, or you're actually just starting to order like glass and corks and all sorts of stuff or screw caps. Sorry, forgive me, for your wines. But that is, I mean, looking at supply chain issues, that was a major issue last year. I think it was somewhat better this year, but we still had some issues with barrels and barrel timing and coming in. Larry, do you see anything?
Well, I don't work with new barrels, so I luckily didn't have that issue whatsoever. So, but as I was said, yeah, I had challenges last year in terms of glass, in terms of screw caps, and so I'm trying to get ahead of it. My problem is I'm just not a very good organizing person, so. Me getting ahead of it is not doing it quite last minute, but it's maybe next to last minute. So I literally just sent emails off yesterday. I've received one back basically saying, okay, looking into it. I haven't received 2 others back, so I'm still waiting to hear. I'm also pretty flexible. I don't have to use the exact same glass mold every year. I don't have to use, so I keep myself pretty flexible in that saved me last year. I actually went to much lighter glass than I've done in the past, a much simpler mold. And I'm the type of person that really doesn't care that much about the bottle shape, the bottle, the bottle weight, etc. To me, it's what's inside the bottle that matters more. So I'm probably going to be a lot more flexible. I know winemakers that waited, like they didn't put their rosé into bottle until December because the shape that they wanted wasn't available for 9 months. And to me, that just seems pretty outrageous personally, but I think you have to be pragmatic in our industry.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, your label shape is relatively forgiving, I guess, on different bottle shapes.
For the most part, I have a very long label, but it works out.
That's what she said. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, we hope she did. I mean, I've got a new baby, so I don't know. Anyways, but I did go through the fun process of doing a burgundy shaped bottle for my Pinot, which I had never done before. But and that was kind of a fun process going with a different shape, because every single bottle I've done before this, regardless of variety, has been the same mold, claret shaped bottle. I just want to keep things as simple as possible. Kind of, in a way, looking back at the old, not Sidori, but, kind of some of the stuff you've done in the past, simplicity goes a long way.
Yeah, it does. And Clarice has had its share of issues with the mold and stuff. One of the things you will notice in 2021, because I couldn't get it applied with any, there used to be a label that went over the cartouche here on the bottle, and it's not happening this year because the bottling line could not get it applied. They didn't have the parts and they couldn't get the parts. And so that was a nightmare. I mean, just a silly thing. And then last but not least, someone was asking about just in general, what's happening with wine pricing these days? What do you see it going? And I mean, we can talk about what individually about what we're doing, but that's not the whole. Where do you think, like, lower crop year, what's happening with pricing? Any thoughts, Larry?
That's a heck of a question. I think it really depends upon your consumer base and who you expect your consumer base to be. I don't expect my pricing to change regardless of the increase in cost of grapes. I think for my brand, there's kind of a limit to what I think I can charge people, and I try to be really realistic about that. But I don't have accountants over my head and investment bankers over my head and investors over my head that might require a different return on investment than I have. So I can only speak for myself and not for anybody else. I know in Santa Barbara County, I'm seeing pricing definitely on the upswing in general. And I think that's probably going to continue. I think Santa Barbara County, the pricing is still, it's lower than it is in most other parts of the state, which is why plenty of Napa and Sonoma wineries have come down and purchased fruit from here. Just the whole cost structure tends to be lower here than it is in Northern California, but that is changing for sure.
Ray, any thoughts? I mean, you worked at a lot of different wineries, Napa Cab, that kind of thing. Any thoughts on pricing overall?
Pricing overall, well, for me, being a little newer, it's not something that I have as much of a track record with, but I mean, working with you and Clarice, I definitely see the supply chain issues and how things are increasing. So it's happening out there, and whether or not or how we adjust to it is, a business decision that we'll have to make. But I mean, my grower asked for more money for my fruit from last year to this year. So I mean, things are increasing, and that's just kind of everywhere. It sucks.
Sure.
It's expensive to make wine. It really is.
It is. I can tell you one of the issues that I deal with a little bit these days is when you're a Clarice member, as many of you are here, and appreciate that very much. But all the pricing includes shipping, includes freight. That's part of the price. And those prices have gone up dramatically. And not only have the prices of freight gone up dramatically, of shipping gone up so much, but the reliability of it has gotten crappier. So you're paying more money for crappier service on stuff. That sucks. I mean, we're paying more money and we're managing to still get good service. That's fine, but getting just worse and worse service on things that cost more, I really hate that, quite frankly. So,
Adam, can I chime in here a little bit as a grower and a small with a small wine brand? This year, the 2020 vintage was the first year I raised prices out in the vineyard in 5 years. And there was a lot of reasons for that. There was 18 was a big vintage, 19 because of the fires up here. I deal with a lot of small wineries, and they depended on direct to consumer, and I got a lot of pushback, and they couldn't take the grapes. I was faced with an oversupply situation. I had a winery, and it changed on a dime from the beginning of 18 to the harvest of 19, where I had a couple of wineries that re-upped, and then in 18, and by 2019 they said they can't take the grapes. I had a winery completely bail on me. I mean, it was a really challenging 5 years, and we tried to. I mean, I took less money in some of those years, and so I'm always very conscious of that, because I want to have a good relationship with my wineries. But I had to raise prices, and then unfortunately, with the low yields, the price increase really didn't help as much as I thought it might have. Sure. And because it didn't offset the low yields. And on the winery side, similar to Murray, when you're starting out, we started our brand in 2011. And I still consider us a relatively new brand or small brand, whatever, just trying to get our traction. Because there's been setbacks for the last 5 years between fires, COVID, supply chain issues. We kept our biggest, our flagship bottling is our Booker vineyard, single vineyard. We kept it at $40 that was the price in 2011, and the first year we raised that was in 2019 to $45. So
Sure.
we've tried to keep our prices low too, but it gets to a point where you just can't. And part of it is when you're a new brand, you want to be attractive in the marketplace. And Maria, I think you can relate to that. You don't want to overprice your product, and or you want to hit a sweet spot. And sometimes it's hard to know where that is. But the costs are just off the charts the last this past year, as all of you have alluded to. And for small brands, it's even harder. We don't have any economies of scale per se in purchasing and purchasing power and that sort of thing. Anyway, that's it's a very challenging, and as Murray said, it's expensive to make wine. It truly is.
It
Yeah.
is.
I mean, John, to expand a little bit on that point, I mean, for smaller wineries, you don't get the discounts that the big wineries get because you're not purchasing as many barrels, as many screw caps, as many bottles.
Right.
And I mean, I see on the price sheet that they send me, and it's like, if you bought 5 more barrels, you would, be in this bracket, which is, less per barrel. But it's like, I don't have that much fruit. I don't need that the many, and I can't. And so now I'm paying a higher price, and it goes on and on and on. And it's not, like I'm trying to play a violin or anything like that. But, as consumers, seeing prices go up, it is good insight as to why, because, one, we don't make as much, and so we get charged and this and that. And, if you look at the Excel sheet, it makes sense, but it's hard to compete and be in that market and be attractive, but be fair to yourself. And it's a labor of love. And if we didn't love it, there's other places that we could all be making more money.
All right, everybody. I think we have reached the end. We're an hour and 12 minutes in. I posted websites here for all the different wineries, for Larry, for John and Diane, for Murray, for myself. I do want to tell you about something coming up that I'm really excited about. October 25th, we are going to be doing a Zoom with Lisa Peretti Brown. Lisa is a master of wine. She was the manager of the robertparker.com for some years, and has now started her own site called The Wine Independent. And we're going to be talking with her. So if you want insights on the trade, on what it's like to be a wine writer, on Bordeaux, on all sorts of different things, we're going to talk about a lot of different things there. So please join with us on October the 25th. And Larry, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it, and being a special guest. We really appreciate your insight very much.
Well, thank you for the invite. And listen, it was an honor and a pleasure to be a part of the panel. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's and everybody, Larry's got a great tasting room. You can come down and see him as well. Not just, you can online and all of that, but a great place to come visit and taste as well.
Yeah, no more self-plugging. So I'll let Adam do it for me.
That's it. No, you can't.
The check is in the mail. I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right.
I want to go down and taste your Grenache, Larry.
Well, and as anyone saw, I don't know if anyone saw, but on the chat, I said, there's an old adage that Grenache promises what Pinot, Grenache produces what Pinot promises.
There you go.
And in all honesty, I was going to pipe in. Grenache and Pinot to me are very, very, very similar varieties. They're both incredibly transparent. They really show their sense of clone and their sense of place. And it takes a different hand to make a Grenache than it does other own varieties. And it takes a different hand and mindset to make Pinot than it does other varieties. So I'll be curious to see how it comes out. Really excited about that.
Cool. Well, thank you all, everybody. Appreciate it. Have a great evening, great weekend. Cheers. Enjoy the night. Thanks.
Cheers.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.
Cheers. Oh, tell Kim we said hi.